Hello everybody, my name is Ayush and today I will be talking about our paper Can I Squeeze Through? Effects of Self-Avatars and Calibration in a Person plus Virtual Object System on Perceived Lateral Passability in VR. Self-avatars and object interactions are at the heart of virtual experiences these days. They allow users to express themselves but also give rise to several perception-based challenges as dynamic surface properties like rigidity and stickiness are absent in VR. This effect is amplified when interacting with virtual objects as the weight and inertial feedback associated with them is often mismatched or missing. But how does that affect our perception and judgments? To better understand that, let's take a quick look at what we already know. We know from a real-world experiment back in 2005 by Wegman et al. That the weight and inertial feedback of objects affects the affordance judgments that you make. We also know that wielding objects changes your embodied body schema and it kind of acts as part of your own body. From experiments in the virtual environments, we know that object estimations are often underestimated. And we know that the appearance of the self-avatars can also affect how you see the object, the environment, the size that you perceive, and the way you make affordance judgments. And from a recent paper, we also know that self-avatars can help with affordance judgments when interacting with virtual handheld objects, which can be a whole different scenario. Now let's talk about the current state of things as they stand. We know that self-avatars can replicate body motion, but they can't mimic dynamic surface properties. This comes into play when you're interacting in virtual environments and you have to maneuver around things or squeeze through objects or openings and something like that. But in VR, your avatar can't really compress, which is a behavior that you're used to in the real world. This can negatively affect your experience, especially in cases where real-world skills transfer is something that you desire. So for example, if you're training to dodge during a game of American football, that could result in very bad experiences if you transfer those learned skills in VR to the real world. As such, it is important to understand how self-avatars affect perception of dynamic properties and affordance judgments that involve dynamic surfaces. To investigate this phenomenon, we conducted a study where we looked at lateral passability judgments for virtual openings of different sizes in the presence and absence of self-avatars. The avatars matched the gender, eye height, shoulder width, arm length, and the body depth of the participant, and they were asked to make judgments on a sideways manner while holding on to virtual objects in front of them. Here's a quick overview of what the study looked like. We had one between subject factor, which was the presence and absence of self-avatar, one within subject factor, the bar size, which was stated as small, medium, and large. And the bar size was actually based off of the participant's body depth that we measured, and I'll show you how we do that in a second. So the bar size was either 0.8 times the body depth, 1 times the body depth, or 1.2 times the body depth. Each participant went through 3 phases, a pre-test phase, a calibration phase, and a post-test phase. And here's an overview of the different trials that participants went through in each of the phases. So both in the pre-test phase and the post-test phase, participants saw 7 different door widths repeated 3 times each for each of the bar sizes. And in the calibration phase, participants saw 5 door widths repeated 3 times each for each of the bar sizes. In total, they conducted 171 trials. The virtual object that participants held on to was modeled after a real-world object called the log bar. And as you can see on the right, the bars were similar in sizes in terms of the length, but their diameter was changed based on the body depth of the participant. Here's a snapshot of what the avatar setup looked like. And here's a quick overview of how we measured the participant's body depth and adjusted it based on the measurements. Here's an image of the virtual environment that participants conducted the trials in. They would start at the start line, pick up the bar from the virtual table, and they could look at themselves while they did that in the virtual mirror. They were also asked to perform a couple of exercises while they held onto the bar at the virtual table. Then when they were ready to do the trial, they would walk up to the judgment line, at which point they would see an opening in the sliding door. They would turn sideways, make a judgment about if they thought they could pass through it or not without touching any of the edges of the door, and then drop the bar and walk back and wait for the next trial to begin. In the calibration phase, participants were asked to also walk up all the way to the door and try to pass through the door so they could actually see if their judgments that they made at the judgment line was actually accurate or not. If participants actually hit the door, then the door would actually become transparent and give you feedback on where you hit the door, and a thud sound was also played so you knew that you actually hit the door. This is an example of what the feedback looks like. Based on past work, we had three main hypotheses. One, lateral passability judgments will scale based on the diameter of the bar. Lateral passability judgments with virtual handle objects will be more accurate in the presence of self-avatars, and calibration will improve lateral passability judgments accuracy with virtual handle objects. In this presentation, I'm only going to cover some of the more interesting results from our paper. For example, this two-way interaction between phase and avatar. The graph you see here on the right is for the avatar condition, showing you passability judgments and the changes between them from the pre-test to the post-test. It also shows you a shift from the critical ratio 1.01 to 1.15. Critical ratios basically tell you at what point do participants start judging towards as passable. And from past work, we know that critical ratios above 1 are actually representative of what we do in the real world as behaviors. Interestingly, we found no significant differences for the no avatar condition between pre-test and post-test. There could be multiple reasons for that, and one of them could be that without an avatar, participants were unsure how thick the bar was in comparison to their own body, and they were not able to calibrate properly. The other reason could be that participants were actually overlapping the virtual bar with their own body, but that was hard for them to figure out without a self-avatar. The third reason could be that they were actually using their real-world body schema for reference, and they were making judgments based on their compressed body depth, even though in VR we don't actually have compression. The other interesting result we saw was for the four-way interaction between phase, door width, bar, and avatar. For the no avatar condition, all bar sizes were actually significantly different between the pre-test and the post-test. The graphs you see here are for the no avatar conditions for all three bar sizes. The top left graph is for the thinner bar condition for the no avatar condition. It shows you a critical ratio shift from 0.96 to 0.89. The top right one is for the matched bar and shows you a shift from 0.975 to 0.925. The bottom left one is for the thicker bar condition and showing you a critical ratio shift from 1 to 0.93. So it seems that the critical ratios for the no avatar conditions are shifting from high to low, which means that it is likely that our previous case about using the real world body schema of a compressed body depth to make judgments might actually be true. Interestingly, for the avatar conditions, only the matched bar condition was actually significantly different from the pre-test to the post-test. We did not see a significant difference in the thicker or the thinner bar condition. However, across all three bar sizes for the avatar condition, we saw a positive shift in the critical ratio, suggesting a calibration that was better than the no avatar condition, suggesting that they were actually moving towards more realistic judgments. To conclude, overall, all three hypotheses that we previously presented are actually supported by our results. To talk about the findings a little bit more, self-avatars help us comprehend what is possible in virtual environments, especially when dynamic properties are at play. Self-avatars also help us calibrate more accurately to affordances when dynamic surface properties and behavior is expected. Visual information about object size seems to overpower mismatched weight and inertial feedback that we get from interaction devices, especially when dynamic behavior may be expected. Overall, this extends our previous understanding of what an embodied body schema with self-avatars can do, and it also is in line with a lot of the previous work. Thank you for attending our talk today, and to see more details, please see our paper. Thank you.